Hi, everyone. Just checking to make sure that you all can hear me and see me. So give me just a minute to get situated here. Hi. All right. Well, welcome everyone to Adam's webinar today on different payers mean different appeal strategies. So glad that we're finally heading towards spring. I put my spring shirt on today and it's 60 degrees outside and the sun's shining, and you're very lucky to have me sitting in a chair with weather like this in central Illinois in March. But we got a really big group today, so I'm glad you all could join me. I'm Denise Wilson. I'm going to be your presenter and your host today. We're going to go about an hour, and I'm going to try to leave time at the end for questions. If you do have questions about the content today, please put them in the little questions text box that you should have. You should have a little control panel that showed up on your screen when you got connected to GoToWebinar. And there's a place for you to enter your questions, and I'll do my best to answer those towards the end of the webinar today. Also, I do have a couple of handouts for you today. If you go to the handouts, one is obviously the slides from today are there. And then I also have the Managed Medicare Appeal Flowchart, because I'm going to talk about that a little bit today as well. So it's actually really easy to find if you just search with your favorite search engine, but I've got it there as well too if you want to download it. I have it on one of the slides coming up, but it's really hard to see it because it's kind of big. It's hard to put it on a small slide, so I have it as a handout as well, just to be sure that you guys can access it if you need to. Okay, let's see. Okay, CEUs. Free CEUs are offered if you're an Adam member. Okay, and I will let you join up until midnight tonight. So as long as you've joined today, it's $125 a year for a single membership. Excuse me. We also have memberships for groups, which offer a discount. You can find those on our Adam homepage at ahdam.org. So if you're an Adam member, we do offer free CEUs. You have to attend the live webinar for at least 50 minutes. And then we do have a survey that pops up automatically for you at the end of the webinar that you need to complete. The CEU certificates will be emailed to you. We usually get them out within a couple of days. CEUs are not available if you're watching the recording of this live webinar. So we do record these webinars and we do post them on our Adam website, but we also have a YouTube channel. I should have put that in here. I didn't think about it for today's presentation, but if you go to YouTube and go to PayerWatch, you can also watch some of our past webinars as well as important snippets from some of the webinars that we've done as well. So we have a new YouTube channel. Just search for PayerWatch and you can find us there as well. As a disclosure for our CEUs, no individuals in a position to control content for this activity have any relevant financial relationships to declare. Okay, when you get to the end of the webinar, these are the choices of your CEUs that you can select from. You can select all or none, 2, 3, whatever is appropriate for your credentials. We set up the survey a little bit differently than we did in the past. We did this last webinar and I think it worked out very well. You actually go through at the end of the webinar and say yes or no to each one of these 5. Yes, I want it, or no, I don't want it. The reason we separated it out and have you say yes or no to each one of those 5 is it just makes it much easier and quicker for us to be able to sort the CEUs that go to the attendees. And so it worked really well last time, and we were able to get the CEUs out to you a lot quicker. Okay, our next complimentary webinar is Appealing Chemotherapy and Biologicals Denial. So it's a little bit focused, but something that you may be interested in, about something that you or your team members are involved in at your organization. And Carla Haravi who is our Vice President of Appeal Services at Appeal Masters, is going to be doing that one. That's kind of her background, and we do see a fair number of these, and there's a lot of information that you need to be aware of in order to be successful in appealing those types of denials. So that's going to be Wednesday, March 29th, 2 p.m. CEUs for ADAM members only. And that one is open for registration on our homepage, so you can register for that now if you'd like to. And the one after that is going to be ChatGPT. If you haven't heard about ChatGPT, then you need to get out more, okay? So that's what I got to say about that. So it's artificial intelligence. It's been all over the news for the last couple of months, talking about whether or not it's going to be helpful for use in the medical field. So we've got some experts who are going to talk about ChatGPT and kind of user beware and our take on, you know, some of the limitations of using artificial intelligence, some of the things that you might be concerned about if you're thinking about using ChatGPT. So that'll be an interesting one as well. Wednesday, May 1st, CEUs will be offered for that one as well. We don't have the registration set up yet for that one, but we will have that set up well in advance. Okay, a little bit about us. We are the nation's only association dedicated to those of you who are working in healthcare denial appeal management. We're coming up on going to be our 3-year anniversary in April, and we're somewhere between around 450 members right now, I think, and still growing. So our mission really is to help support you who are working in this profession and to help level the playing field so that payers and providers are working off the same playbook to help us be more successful in making sure that payers are paying our claims appropriately and fairly. Okay, so that's what we're all about. We were created through the generous support of PayerWatch, and PayerWatch is a leading provider of payer denial, audit, and appeal solutions. They have a software platform as well as appeal services, education, and consulting. And another disclaimer that I need to read through just to make sure that you're not relying on any of the material I present today as being completely accurate or being an authority. The ADAM organization publishes and distributes materials that are created by our members or invited industry subject matter experts for the benefit of you all. We do not certify the accuracy or authority of the materials. They're distributed and presented as research information to be used by you in conjunction with other research that you deem necessary in the exercise of your independent professional judgment. We claim no liability in relation to reliance on the content of the materials, and the views expressed in materials are the views of the materials authors and do not necessarily represent the views of ADAM. Any references are provided for informational purposes only, do not constitute endorsement of any sources, and we have no conflicts of interest to declare. Okay, a little bit about me. I'm a Senior Vice President at PayerWatch Appeal Masters, and I'm President of the Association for Healthcare Denial and Appeal Management. Been in healthcare my entire adult career, well over 30 years, in direct patient care, clinical management, education, compliance, and then the last 15 years I've been mainly focused in appeal writing, actually about 19 years. I've been with PayerWatch for about 15 years. So today I do a lot of education, a lot of training, a lot of running the association. And if you ever need someone to do a talk for your organization, for your local chapter of an association that you're involved in, please think of me. I'm happy to do that for you, and so you can reach out and let me know. Dr. Kendall Smith was scheduled to be with us today. Unfortunately, he's under the weather today, so I'm going to be flying solo without my color commentator. But hopefully we'll do fine getting through this. So our learning objectives today is to describe the essential differences in appeal process based on payer, contract, and appellant. So this is more about processes in appeals, not so much about writing the appeal or best practices for making your arguments, but this is appeal processes. And the reason I selected this particular topic today, as I select all of our topics, is feedback from you all on what you want to hear and questions that we receive at the association based on denial and appeal management. So I get a lot of questions about the information there's like 3 main areas of information I'm going to cover today, and I get a lot of questions on those. So at the conclusion of the webinar, and these are going to be kind of what your questions are based on when you do the survey, you should be able to identify 2 opportunities to move through the 5-level Medicare appeals process, when the payer is a Medicare Advantage plan, the ability to identify what type of form is required for a provider to appeal on behalf of the patient. So that's the other question I get asked a lot. How do I appeal on behalf of the patient? And the ability to identify the payer's timeframes for appeal. So I get asked about that fairly frequently as well. So a couple of ideas or topics that I'm going to kind of talk about today during this webinar is one's called external review, one's called patient rights of appeal. So external review means a review that's completed by an independent review organization or an IRO, or sometimes it's called an independent review entity or IRE, that is external to the payer's internal appeal process. So the internal appeal process is sending your appeal back to the payer, whatever levels of appeal they allow you, 1 or 2 or 4 or 5 or whatever. External means you're sending your appeal to an organization that is not the payer. And then the patient rights of appeal. So patients have much greater rights of appeal than providers do. And you can use this to your advantage. So we get asked about that quite a bit. How do I appeal on behalf of the patient so that I can take my appeal to external review when I use the patient's rights of appeal? Because a lot of external review is really governed by your state regulations. There's a little bit of federal regulation in there as well, primarily state regulated. And patients in every state have the right to appeal to an external review organization. Rarely do they do it. Rarely do they use that, probably because they don't really know about it. Or very few patients appeal anyway, but to take it to external review, I think it's more of a knowledge thing than anything else, at least from my research on it. But providers can appeal on behalf of the patient, and that allows you then to go to external review. Why do you want to go there? Well, historically, and from reports that we've seen, you have a better chance to overturn if you can get outside of the internal appeal process, if you can get to an external independent review organization. So that's what we're talking about when I say going all the way, taking your appeal all the way. That means advocating the patient's greater rights of appeal for the hospital's benefit. As long as it gets overturned, you're going to get paid as a provider. Okay, so how do I get my appeal into that 5-level appeal process? So I have a lot of people ask about the 5-level appeal process. So when we talk about that, we're talking about, Medicare has a 5-level appeal process. So if your payer is traditional Medicare, you get to go through this 5-level appeal process, but it's also available to you if one of 2 things is in place. You are not contracted with a Medicare Advantage plan. So you have a denial from Medicare Advantage plan, and your hospital or you as a provider, you're not contracted with that plan, you get to go through the 5-level appeal process. Okay. The other way you can get through the 5-level appeal process is if you appeal on behalf of the patient. Okay. So if you appeal on behalf of the patient, even if you're contracted, you can go through the 5-level appeal process. All right, so I'm going to do a poll. We haven't done a poll. We do polls rarely, but I want to ask you, which level of appeal in the Medicare 5-level appeal process do you consider to be the first level of external or independent review. So let me pull up the poll and launch it. And I'll give you, 30, 45 seconds to see what your thoughts are. And then I'm going to give you what my thought is. What my, again, it's my opinion of what I think. Okay, so about 60% of you have voted. I'll give it a few more seconds, and then we'll see what the results look like. All right, let's close her down and share that with y'all. Okay, so our poll results are 18% believe at level 1 you're getting an independent review, external review, independent of the payer. 34% say at level 2, 42% at level 3, and then a few of you picked level 4 or level 5. So that's interesting. The level 2 and level 3 got the highest number of votes. So I was just curious what you all might say. So here's my thought on it. In my opinion, again, I feel like your independent review or external review occurs at the administrative law judge hearing. And the reason I say that is because the administrative law judges are employed by the Office of Medicare Hearings and Appeals. Omaha is under the Department of Health and Human Services. So if you look at like a organizational chart, the Department of Health and Human Services, CMS, is a department under the Department of Health and Human Services. Omaha is an organization under the Department of Health and Human Services. So they both report up to the Department of Health and Human Services. So to me, that makes them independent from CMS. Now, level 2 reconsideration, you might think that's independent review, and it's supposed to be an independent review because it's done by a QIC, right? A qualified independent contractor. So they are independent, correct? Well, they are independent from the MAC or the Medicare Advantage plan, but they're not independent necessarily from CMS because they are contracted with CMS to do your reconsideration. Again, I don't know that there's a hard and fast and right or wrong answer to this. I was just curious of what you all think, and I just wanted to share my thoughts on what I think. So I always think of the ALJ level 3 as being that's your external review when you're talking about Medicare. Okay. So how do you get to external review to Medicare's 5-level external review or 5-level review appeal process, which includes external review? The answer is who's the payer and are you contracted? Okay, so if it's traditional Medicare, you have automatic access to the 5 levels of appeal. If it's Medicare Advantage plan and you have a contract with that plan, you can access the 5 levels of appeal if you appeal on behalf of the patient. If you appeal on behalf of the provider, you get whatever levels of appeal your contract says you get, and then you're done. Okay, Medicare Advantage plan, but you don't have a contract with them, you get automatic 5 levels of appeal. When you appeal, you have to appeal using a waiver of liability form that says you're going to hold the patient harmless. You're not going to go back and bill the patient if you don't get your appeal overturned. Okay, so you need a waiver of liability if you have a Medicare Advantage plan that you're not contracted with. And these are just resources for you all to, if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of how all of that works, there's a document, and it's a fairly lengthy document called Part C and D enrollee grievances, appeal guidance, et cetera, et cetera. Part D being your pharmacy, medication. If Medicare eligible folks want to sign up for Part D, they can to get their medications covered. That's Part D. Part C is Medicare Advantage. These used to be separate documents. A couple of years ago, they decided to combine them, which makes it a little bit difficult to read through them because some of them applies to Part C, some of it applies to Part D. You got to keep track. Which one are they talking about? But it does give you all the details on how the whole appeal process works. And then here's how you can find the flow chart that I was talking about. I'm going to show that on the next slide. And then you can also download it from our handout. My earbuds are not wanting to stay in today. So this is the Medicare Managed Care Appeals flow chart. And I think right at the very top, when I went to download this, I always, whenever I'm going to include this in a talk, I always want to make sure I've got the most recent one and to make sure, one, that they haven't changed anything and that I wasn't aware of. And then also there are amounts and controversy or dollar amounts that have to be in the denial in order for you to go to certain levels. So I always want to make sure I have the most recent one. And I noticed at the top of this flow chart, they have this sentence that says applies to non-contracted providers and beneficiaries. I don't think that used to be there. And they also have the URL on how to go to the flow chart if you want to download it. So their URL is a little shorter than mine. So that's handy, congrats for doing that. I think that's great. So you follow, essentially you're going to follow the left-hand side of this. The right-hand side is for expedited appeals when you're trying to determine whether Medicare Advantage plan is going to cover, an upcoming service. You need a decision right now because they're going to start those services. But the left-hand side is the standard process, and you have 60 days to file. Once they have made a decision on payment for the services rendered to the patient, they have 60 days to determine if they're going to pay or not. Then you have 60 days to file an appeal, and it goes back. Your first level of appeal goes to the health plan, and it's called reconsideration, whereas in traditional Medicare, it's called redetermination. For managed Medicare, it's called reconsideration. And I think it's important that you use the right terminology because I have seen payers who will not accept your appeal or will, what do I want to say, not cancel it, but they won't accept it as valid, invalidate it if you use the wrong terminology. And there's one in Texas. For you Texas providers, you probably know who I'm talking about, who's very weird about that. But anyway, health plan reconsideration, so it goes back to the health plan. They have 60 days to review and decide whether or not they're going to overturn the denial based on the appeal. If they uphold, if the plan, the Medicare Advantage plan, upholds the denial, they automatically forward it to the independent review entity. That's what IRE stands for. Independent review entity, and you should get notification from the IRE that your appeal has been forwarded to them. Okay, if you're not getting notification, then you need to reach out to the health plan or to the IRE and find out where the breakdown in communication is. So it's an automatic forwarding. You do not have to send it. Now that's called independent review entity. So again, you think, well, this is independent, this is external review, but they're kind of the same entities as on the Medicare, traditional Medicare side. So again, in my opinion, when you get to level 3, Omaha Office of Medicare Hearings and Appeals, that's when you're truly outside the internal appeal process. So you do have to have certain dollars in your denial in order to go to an ALJ. It has to be greater than or equal to $180. That gets updated every year. If you want to go to federal district court, Level 5, you have to have $1,850 at stake to do that. Okay, so just to kind of bring you all up to date, if you're not aware of this, the reason that I think it's really important that we understand Medicare Advantage and we understand how to appeal successfully Medicare Advantage denials is because look at the growth in Medicare Advantage enrollment since 2000 and when did it first start? 2007, 2008, up to 2022. So last year we're almost at 50%. So almost 50%, and it's predicted to go over 50%, I think, this year in 2023. So at least half of our Medicare eligible patients are going to be in a Medicare Advantage plan and not traditional Medicare. So we got to know it. We got to know how to handle these types of denials. Okay, so speaking about appealing on behalf of the patient. So I recommend as best practice. Others that I've spoken with who are actually doing this recommend it as best practice in our community. Become the patient's appointed representative with the initial paperwork to include an appointment of representation form signed by the patient. Appointment of representative or appointment of representation form signed by the patient. So just get it up front. Don't wait to see if you're going to get a denial and then try to track the patient down so you can get that paperwork signed and get your appeal in because you've got a limited amount of time to do that. So just make it part of your admission packet to get that appointment of representative form signed. Okay, so which form do you use? And again, this is going to be, this is our opinion, my opinion. The CMS 1696 form is the AOR form. So if you just search for CMS 1696, you can find it, or I've got the URL there. And that is used for something we use for traditional Medicare. But you could create a form yourself that has language that is substantially similar to the form and use that. And I would expect that the majority, especially Medicare Advantage payers, would accept that because it's going to have probably all of the language, all of the information that Medicare requires in order for you to file a Medicare Advantage appeal. Okay, so you could try that. You could use the 1696 form for traditional Medicare, 1696 for creating your own form with language that's similar to that. You could have, your state may have some rules that they dictate what needs to be on the form or what information you need to send in order to appeal. So that's something to research as well. Or the easier route maybe is to use the form that was provided by the payer. And think about, is it required by your contract? Does your contract say you have to use their form or they won't accept your appeal? Or is it in the provider manual that says you must use your form? Or are they just providing it as an easy way for you to get all the information they'd like to have when you file your appeal? So those are just some things to think about when you think about which form do you use. There's not, again, a hard and fast answer to that. It's different things that you should consider. Do you want to have one form that you use for all of your payers? You can try that. Some of your payers may balk at it. Or have the form that's provided by the payer. Okay. So talking about external review, because like I said, one of the main reasons for appealing on behalf of the patient, or one of the main incentives for doing that, is so that you can take advantage of going to external review. There may be some other reasons why you want to appeal on behalf of the patient. For example, if you only have an opportunity, let's say you've completed your internal appeal process and now your next option is to go to, say, dispute resolution, and you don't want to go to dispute resolution because it's very time consuming and it's a lot of money, you may have the option then to begin the appeal process, filing on behalf of the patient. Again, it's going to be state specific, it's going to be contract specific, it's going to be payer specific. I'm not a lawyer, so please don't rely on things that I presented during this webinar to be legal advice. You really need to do your own research and get your own staff attorneys involved in helping you understand what your options are. But speaking of external review, the rules around external review, as I said, are primarily guided by state regulations. And the state regulations will specify who can file. Can a patient file? Can a provider file? Can someone representing the patient file? Which denial issues are eligible? So patients always have the option to appeal what we call UM, or utilization management denial. So a patient can always go to external review if they have a denial that was based on medical necessity. Now, some states will even allow, if it was denied for experimental investigational, they can appeal. Other states will say, nope, we're not going to hear that at external review in our state, even if it's filed by the patient. So which denial issues are eligible? Also, the external review is not going to be available typically to ERISA plans because those are federally regulated. Okay, ERISA plans are federally regulated. External review, as defined by the state, is typically not available as well for Medicare or Medicare Advantage plans, because again, those are federally mandated insurances. Okay, so that's something you really need to be aware of. And then also the cost. Typically, there's a small cost involved, depending on whether you're the patient. Patients, usually it's like $25 to file to external review. Some states will say, well, if the payer prevails, that $25 gets paid by the plan. If the patient loses at external review, then the patient has to bear the cost of that $25. So anyway, there's typically a cost involved. You can find your rules around external review usually under your state's Department of Insurance. It might be under your state's Department of Banking and Insurance. It might be under your state's Department of Financial Services, different organizations in your state that will have the rules published for external review. So I just have a couple of examples here. And I picked New Jersey just because I've looked at New Jersey state regulations in the past, and they're a little more liberal than a lot of the states. And I don't mean that in a political way. I just mean that they're a little bit more generous in allowing what they allow to go to external review. So I wanted to use them. Now, I have not researched every state's rules and regulations. That would be something that would be, not something I plan on doing in my lifetime, but I have staff that I could reach out to who are very resourceful and can let me know what's going on, what the rules are in every state. So in New Jersey, a covered person or provider acting with the consent of the covered person, so that would be your AOR form, has the right to contest a utilization management denial through internal and external appeals. And they even spell out, this is their little graphic off their website. Stage one is the internal appeal with the carrier meaning the medical plan, insurance plan, the carrier's medical director or physician making the denial. Stage two is an internal appeal back to the payer with a panel selected by the plan, including a doctor of like specialty. And then your stage three appeal goes to external. And they have a program in their state, and other states have programs as well. In New Jersey, it's called the Independent Healthcare Appeals Program. So they have a state-run program that manages their external reviews. I keep moving my mouse off my slide. There we go. Now, there's always going to be exceptions, and so you just have to be very careful to understand what you can and cannot do as far as going to external review. And like I said before, New Jersey says if they're covered, if the individual's covered under a self-funded insurance plan, and that's ERISA, Medicare, Medicare Advantage product, external review is not available. If the individual is covered under a contract that was delivered in another state, external review in New Jersey is not available. If the healthcare provider lacks the consent of the covered individual to make the appeal, and they made the appeal, that's a no. And the internal appeal process, if it has not been completed, then they won't accept your appeal. So you have to complete the internal appeal process unless the payer fails to meet the timeframes for the separate stages of the appeal. So the payer has failed in some way to complete the internal appeal process. It's not your fault. That's a different story. But if you have to, in general, complete that process before you can go to external review. And this is not a complete list of their exceptions. I just pulled out some to kind of give you an example of what those exceptions might look like. Okay, so under the New Jersey Department of Banking and Insurance, they also allow, if you are a healthcare provider, to appeal a claims determination if the plan's determination resulted in the claim not being paid at all for reasons other than a UN determination. Now, this is the only state that I'm aware of. If you guys on the call are aware of other states that do this, I'd appreciate if you put that in the questions, because I'd like to research that, where they allow you to appeal claims that are not medical necessity claims. Okay, so New Jersey says if the payer determination resulted in the claim being paid at a rate you didn't expect, based upon your agreement between you and the carrier, you can submit an appeal. And if the carrier's determination resulted in the claim being paid at a rate you did not expect because of differences in their treatment of the codes on the claim from what you believe is appropriate, you can submit a healthcare provider application to appeal. So that means coding and clinical validation. Okay, so that's rare that a state will allow you to do an external appeal outside of, or even appeal outside of medical necessity. Okay, so here's a question for you. I don't have this as a poll, maybe I should have. I was hoping to kind of discuss this a little bit with Dr. Smith on the call today, and he's not with us, so I'll just give you my thoughts on it. Could a provider contract with a payer to take cases to external review? And I talked about this with our internal attorney, and we kind of had a little discussion about it. And if it's a contract and you both are agreeable to that contract, I don't see why you cannot ask to have that in your contract with your payer to say, look, if we're not successful in overturning our denial through your internal appeals process, we would like the option to take our cases to external review. And then you probably have to work out some kind of payment back and forth. The winner pays, the loser pays. There probably might be a payment penalty in order for you to go to external review. And I've heard that from a couple of our ADAM members who've said, we can take them to external review per our contract, but we have to pay a penalty, $200, $250 or whatever, if we want to do that. Okay, so just food for thought. Okay, a little bit about time. So that's it on appealing on behalf of the patient and external review. Let's talk a little bit about timeframes for appeal, because we get this question on a fairly regular basis as well. This is, I know you can't read this very well on the slides. This is just, I just wanted to give you a graphic snapshot of what a payer matrix table might look like, and hopefully you all have this and you all have easy access to it. That tells you your payers, what products they have, what are your first level of appeal timeframes, what do you do if there's no response, What happens if there's no response? What does your second level appeal look like? What does your external appeal look like? Where does your external appeal go if you have that opportunity to go to external appeal? What are the time frames for that? So you can, if you're downloading the slides, you can give that a little look over and see if that's something you think might be beneficial to you. Then I just picked a payer. I just randomly picked Humana and went in and looked at their timeframes for appeal. So your timeframes for appeal are going to come from either your contract or your provider manual. And a lot of times your contract is just going to say refer to your provider manual, and that will give you your timeframes for appeal. So this is what it looks like if you go to the Humana provider manual. For their commercial, I believe this is for their commercial plan. No, I'm sorry, this it says right there on the slide, Denise, it says MA contracted. If you're contracted with the Medicare Advantage plan through Humana, the provider manual says you have 18 months from the date the claim was paid. That's pretty generous, actually. It also goes on to say that you can submit a request for a second dispute or reopening, but it doesn't give a time frame, which I thought was kind of odd, that it didn't give a time frame for that. And then if you're Medicare Advantage non-contracted, okay, they tell you have 60 calendar days from the date of the denial with a waiver of liability form. And that's what we said. That's what it says on the graphic that I gave you that talks about the Medicare Advantage plan process. You have 60 days to file with a waiver of liability form. So good for them. They are in compliance with what Medicare says. Now, this is a question that I get asked. We get asked quite a bit. So a lot of our commercial payers, especially Medicare Advantage payers, are contracting with auditors to audit their claims. So the denial is actually issued by the auditor and not technically by the payer themselves. And the information that we get, that I have heard through our members and through some of the work that I've done, is if you question the payer about what time frames have you got set up with the auditor for auditing and appealing and getting a response back, a lot of times they won't share that with you, believe it or not. I know that's hard to believe, but they will not share that with you. And so, because it's a contract between the payer and the auditor, so timeframes for review and appeal are not always visible to the provider when an auditor is involved. An auditor may offer, once they've denied your claim, very short timeframes for appeal. They might say you have 30 days to appeal, as opposed to 18 months for Humana Medicare Advantage. They may offer multiple levels of appeal that have to go back to the auditor. They may offer you 1, 2, 3, 4 levels of appeal back to the auditor, not to the payer. So what time frame do you abide by? Do you abide by the auditor's time frames or by your contracted or provider manual time frames? So my best advice is, if you can honor the auditor's time frames, you probably save yourself a lot of trouble if you can do it. But if you can't, and I know sometimes you can, if they give you 30 days and you've got a whole stack of appeals you got to get through, you can't always meet that 30 days. I would recommend that you hold payers accountable for the auditing, or hold the auditors accountable. I probably shouldn't have said payer. Hold the auditors accountable for the auditing rules that are in the contract or the payer manual. Okay, does that make sense? So if there's auditing rules that are in your contract or in your payer manual, I would push back to the auditor and say, this is what our payer says are the auditing rules, and we feel you should be following those. Do you have state laws or requirements about auditing, regarding auditing, and are they in alignment with your state laws and regulations? So this is something you can use, giving it to you if you want to use it. This has been reviewed by our internal attorney, our appeals support. And it states that if you want to appeal back to the auditor and say, you know, this is not what our contract says, this is not what the provider manual says as far as time frame, you can use this language or something similar to this language that says, hey, we got a denial, we include an appeal submission time frame. Oh, you included an appeal submission time frame that was in conflict with the terms of our agreement. The agreement is subject to principles of contract interpretation regarding clear and unambiguous terms, such as the payer's appeal process and time frame. We dispute the appeal submission time frame provided by you in the denial letter, and we submit this appeal pursuant to the submission time frame established under our contract. And you are obligated to act in good faith to effectuate the prompt, fair, and equitable settlement of the claims pursuant to our state insurance law, and then you can cite your state insurance law. And the state insurance law that I have here is from New Jersey, that says that a carrier's contractors are subject to the same standards as the carrier when performing claim payment and processing functions, including overpayment requests on behalf of the carrier. So anytime they use the word carrier in their regulations, they mean the carrier, which is the payer, and its relevant contractor. So essentially saying that they have to act in the same way that the payer would. Okay. All right. So that's it for today. We've got about 10 or 15 minutes left. I want to thank the support team in our corporate office for helping me out with the webinar today. And I'm going to take a look over our questions and see if there's anything I can answer for you. I do try to do answer questions that I can't get to today, either in a personal email back to you, or we do try to do some Q&As that we post to our website, but I have to tell you, a little behind on getting those posted, so we'll do the best that we can. Okay, so just give me a minute and let me look at some questions. Oh, good question. This is from Brenda. And I didn't talk about this during the discussion. And actually, we're still doing some research on this particular question because I've heard this is happening as well. At least, so the question is, or the comment really, at least one payer rejects our member appeals if there is no member liability. So what the payers are saying is, well, the patient doesn't know anything, so you can't continue to appeal it because, you know, there's no, the patient's claim is settled. So we're looking into, we actually have our legal team kind of looking into that and trying to determine how we can push back on that particular response, because I have heard that from a number of folks. So stay tuned for that. Okay, another question from Jacob says, does the payer pay for the independent review organization? And if so, is this truly an independent review? That's a good question. Actually, it's not the payer who pays for the IRO. I believe it is the state who manages, if you're going to external review in your state, it's the state that manages the IRE or IRO program in the state. So it's not, I don't believe that money is coming from the payer. But that's a good question. Okay, and someone asked, Cheryl asked, does this information apply to all types of denials, such as DRG denials for coding clinical validation? So hopefully I clarified that as, again, it depends on what your state allows. Okay, so your state may allow, like New Jersey appears to allow, I'm pretty sure that they allow DRG and coding. I don't know if anybody is on from New Jersey. If you want to pop in and say, yes, we do it all the time. No, I didn't know that. Kind of confirm that, but that appears to be what their regulations are saying. The vast majority of states is going to be medical necessity, and that really came out of some of that has to do with the Affordable Care Act in 2010, where they said all patients in all states should have the right to go to external review for utilization management. Okay. Okay, someone else talked about no patient financial liability. So commercial external review would always require patient AOR form signature. Yes, if you want to go to external review as a provider, you have to appeal on behalf of the patient. So you have to have the patient's appeal right to submit your appeal so that you, through the internal appeal process and then to external review. Yes, and the patient needs to sign an AOR form. Let's see. Are there fees to the hospital to take to external review? If you're doing it on behalf of the patient, you would have to pay whatever someone has to pay that patient's fee, which, according to the Affordable Care Act, I think the majority of the states, they charge the patient like $25. They can waive that for the patient if the patient has financial hardship. So yeah, I believe that the hospital would have to pay that fee. No, here's a good question from Jenna, who said, if you're not contracted with the MA plan, is it still beneficial to obtain a patient AOR and appeal on behalf of the patient rather than a provider? No, because you're going to get, if you're not contracted with that MA plan, you automatically get your 5-level appeal process. So you do not need an AOR. You don't have to appeal on behalf of the patient. You appeal as a provider. Okay, let me go back to that slide. I know that was hard to see. But remember, it said at the top, applies to non-contractor providers and beneficiaries. Okay, so you automatically get that 5-level appeal process. Okay, Cindy says, we have successfully used a signed request from the attending requesting appeal, and our MA plans accept that. Huh, very good. Cindy, maybe you can share a little bit more with me in an email about how that works for you. Nancy says, FYI, we have had payers demand their own forms. I read that as deny their own forms, Nancy. So I was laughing. Yeah, and I used to be of the thought that as long as I'm providing everything that you've requested on the form, I shouldn't have to fill out a form. Okay, I've already got a lot of that information in my appeal letter. Now when I fill out a form, there's always an opportunity to make a mistake, get something wrong, and then they're going to reject it because something's wrong. But you know what? With today's technology, when you've got forms that can be filled out online, when you've got robotic process automation, they make it so easy now to fill out their forms or to do a form that I don't grump about it too much anymore. If it makes them happy and it gets your appeal accepted, why not use their form? Okay, Heather, this is a good question. If including the AOR form in initial paperwork, what verbiage do you use with patients and families that doesn't make it seem like you're expecting a denial? That's a really good question. If someone has a good answer to that, put that in the questions, and I'll send that out to everyone. If you created your own form, or even if you're using, a published appointment of representative form, how do you explain it to the patient that you're not expecting a denial? Okay. So I do have some responses from some folks on the call today who have contracted an independent review into their contracts, the option to go to independent review. Okay, Linda says, have you had good success using the CMS 1696 AOR form? Have any payers told you they do not accept it? And which department obtains this form? All good questions. So I would, what I've heard from providers that I've worked with and folks in the community is it's typically the registration that gets that form and puts it in with all of your admission registration packet. As far as using the CMS 1696 AOR form, that should be accepted by Medicare Advantage plans. I don't know about the success rate with that. That would be something for this, a good question for the group. You can download, someone want to know how to download the slides. You should have an option in your control panel that says handout. And I see my support staff actually answered that one already for you. So good. Hopefully you were able to get those slides. Paul, you've got a really good question. If you're externally appealing through the patient appeal rights and the patient gets charged the appeal fee, if the appeal loses, what is the motivation for a patient to even agree to an issue for which they are not held liable? That's a good question. It's like a $25 fee, and I would assume if the hospital is appealing on behalf of the patient that they are paying that $25 fee, and the patient probably is, you've got to sign an AOR form. That's about all that the patient involvement, amounts to, except for they do get, they're going to get notice from the payers, that an appeal has been filed. But otherwise, they don't really have to have any involvement in that process. Okay, Vicki says, is anyone else concerned about how the MAOs are enticing beneficiaries into signing with them? And that was really part of, I don't know if you all submitted responses to the CMS proposed rule on Medicare Advantage plans for 2024, but that was part of some of the kind of guardrails that CMS is considering putting into place, is to kind of crack down a little bit on how MAO plans are advertising and enticing members to sign up, for them to be more transparent, for them to be more truthful in their advertising. If you're not aware of that, you can search for CMS proposed rule Medicare Advantage 2024 should get you there, or you can email me and I can send you the link to where you can find that. But there's wording in that proposed rule to help crack down on that. Okay, well, we're right up against the end of our time. Got quite a few more questions. I'll try my best, like I said, to get through those and to give you some feedback as to what some of the folks on the call today have had to say, how they've responded to some of our questions. And I just want to say thanks for attending. You can always email me at denise@adam.org, and make sure you register for our March 29th webinar. That registration is up and available right now. So thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day. We'll see you at the end of March.